Hi handsome and welcome to my 24th video. This time we are once again doing something a little different, as we are taking a look into the past. More specifically, we are looking at past Calpheon and Heidel Balls, and even more specifically, at the content Perlebis promised but has not delivered. Now, I don't want this video to be a hit piece on Perlebis. Originally, I wanted to make a video going through every ball to see just how much of what was promised ultimately made it to the servers, but to also serve as a cautionary tale so that you don't get hyped for things announced in the somewhat recent Heidel Ball or any future balls for that matter. In case you are wondering how much promised content from each ball made it to the game so far, here you go. That concept had two major flaws, however. First, there is simply too much content that was added throughout the years, so the video would be unnecessarily too long, and it would also be kind of redundant as a lot of the content got mentioned repeatedly and I didn't really know how to count it. Second, if you play BDO, which I assume you do since this is a BDO channel, you already know which content got added, and chances are you know more about it than I do. With that being said, some of the content I will be talking about has not been officially cancelled, at least as far as I know, so there is a chance that if you are watching this video in like 2028 or later down the line, your version of BDO did eventually get it. As for the reason that the given piece of promised content has not made it to the game yet, you are of course free to speculate in the comments down below, and if you want my own opinion, which I will give you right now, I will just give it to you in the form of one of my favorite quotes, known as the Hanlon's razor, which reads, "Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity." So there you go. Another thing I need to mention is that I will only be looking into content from Calpheon Ball 2020 to Calpheon Ball 2023. Obviously, it's too soon to include anything from this year's Heidel Ball since it's been like a month, and the reason we are starting in 2020 is because of three different things actually. First of all, and this is the simplest reason why, I wasn't able to find anything older than Calpheon Ball 2020. So even if I wanted to make it on older stuff, I wasn't able to find it. Even if I did, it would be a little disingenuous from me to comment on it because I wasn't playing the game back then anyway. And the last reason is that this ball, the Calpheon Ball 2020, was the one when Perlebis announced that they are going to be self-publishing. So I think it would be most fair to only judge them on content they promised after they got rid of the cacao shackles, if you will. Since then you cannot use the excuse of it being like publisher meddling or whatnot. I will also not be talking about anything that has to do with performance or balance or bug fixes or anything like that, since these things change often, so there is no way for me to really check if they did or did not happen. Finally, I am not a historian or a walking encyclopedia on BDO, so there is a chance that some of these actually made it to live servers in some shape or form and I just don't know about them or wasn't able to research them properly. There is a chance I made a mistake in some of these, so if you know more about it or if you know about more content that got cancelled or didn't see the light of day in general that I don't mention in the video, feel free to share that with everyone else in the comments. And again, this is not a hit piece, I am not a BDO hater, this is just a look back into what could have been and also a way to measure your hype for other upcoming content Perlebis has revealed. With that being said, let's start with one of the most famous, or maybe I should say infamous, cancelled or never released content which you may already know, and it's none other than the Blue Battlefield. This is something that got announced even before Calpheon Ball 2020, but it was mentioned multiple times in multiple of the balls throughout the years that I will cover, although it never made it to the live servers. In case you really don't know what this is, imagine RBF, so Red Battlefield, but instead of fighting on land, you fight with ships on the sea. Judging from what Perlebis have said, there were constant issues with this game mode, whether it was bugs, the general feel of the ship combat, the desync, lag, or just the fun factor not really being there. I really think this was just over ambitious from Perlebis' side, and as far as I know they just replaced it with the pirate system. So this was just the appetizer, everybody knows about this, everybody memes about this, but the other content I will talk about might actually surprise you. The next one is something that people, or at least some people, do actually want, although I don't really know why, and I am kind of glad that it's not in the game. It's the sheriff or bounty system, where people would be designated as sheriffs or bounty hunters and protect weaker, newer players by hunting red players for silver. This is a flawed system from its inception. In the very best case scenario, you end up with hidden runs. Imagine a scenario where you are grinding, the red player appears, they kill you, you call your Dark Souls Blue Phantom, but before they can arrive, since I assume they wouldn't be able to just teleport at your direct location, you get killed a few more times, and then the red player just hops off to another character or another channel and does it to someone else. You would need a sheriff for every single spot on every single server in the game for a system like this to really work, and people are not going to just stand around in a spot waiting for someone to protect. Another flaw has been pointed out many times already by people who have talked about this system, and is the idea of corrupt sheriffs where they would be in league with the red players. So you get killed, the sheriff appears, he collects the bounty from the red player, and then he just leaves again and lets him kill you again so he can farm more bounties. Again, I am very happy Perlabis seemed to have dropped this one. Next, we have something that kind of made it to the game eventually, although PA later classified this content as cancelled, so I'm not really sure how that works. It's the 10v10 Arena of Solaire. It's not a GVG, it's just with random people. The reason Perlabis cancelled this one is because the 3v3 mode was already taking its place, but as I said, we did get a 10v10 GVG, so it's not really cancelled as much as it's just repurposed. But then again, Perlabis did announce this, and or at least they said that they want to make multiple game modes, like a capture the flag or a small siege-like mode, and we didn't get those yet. So even if we assume that the 10v10 GVG is similar enough, it's still not everything. And honestly, a GVG capture the flag mode sounds kind of fun. Speaking of guilds, there is something that I'm not quite sure about. They call it the server war, and I will let you guys read everything about how this type of PvP would have worked had it made it to the servers, which I do believe it didn't. But if you are doing something else or you just don't want to read, essentially your guild could choose a main guild server, which is kind of the way we have it now, and every now and then your guild would become hostile with every guild that has a different main guild server from yours. And you could then invade their server and kill them in the open world without any penalty whatsoever, and the ultimate goal would be to steal their server relic to get a bonus for your own home server. After which, the servers would somehow collide or merge into just the Calpheon and Valencia servers, where the guilds would be split somewhat evenly, and it would start something like a big world versus world, I suppose. All of this sounds extremely far-fetched, but it also sounds like a relic of what BDO used to be, where it was more open world PvP oriented. So there is a chance that this was maybe an event or content that got later removed. If any of you did a lot of large-scale PvP back then, or in general played the game a lot back in like 2021 or 2020, please let me know if this ever made it to the game. Must have been hell for the life skillers though, if it actually did. Coming up, we have the Black Star World Boss. This was supposed to be a world boss located in the Stars End Zone with some quote-unquote gimmicky meteorites and platforming that would reward Black Star upgrade materials upon its defeat. Since we are way past Black Star gear now, I don't think this boss will ever drop in the way that they wanted to, or at least they wanted it to, but it has not been officially cancelled, so I have no idea. Let's continue with something that I find really interesting. The hardcore grind spot known as Terror of the Sea or later on Terror of the Abyss. Now, how this was supposed to work was that you could enter the spot, you would have reduced vision while inside the zone, and you would have to kill progressively harder to defeat mobs, and if you died, you would lose half of the loot you obtained during the grind, and you also wouldn't be able to grind there for a while after. And by a while, I mean like a week or 2 weeks. I am not sure, and they have not really mentioned if this would have been a PvP zone. They kinda said, or at least they mentioned it in a PvE, so I assume it was PvE only, and I don't know how PvP depths would affect this, but judging from the recently announced hardcore servers, I think it might have been, since the term hardcore kinda suggests PvP, at least to me, and it has similar ideas to the hardcore server that got announced in Heidel Ball 2024. This has been cancelled by PA already, like 2 years ago, because it wasn't fun, according to them. And I tend to agree. If it really was PvP only, it would only get occupied by the best geared players, effectively widening the gap between them and the rest of the player base, which would lead to people leaving the game for good. And if it was PvE only, it would have been maybe interesting, but I don't know how they would be able to balance it. They also talked briefly about the Mountain of Eternal Winter during this ball, and what they have said here is basically all true, other than one thing that got removed as far as I know, because it's not mentioned in other balls, and honestly the region is better off without it. They wanted to make it so the zone would have sudden snowstorms and you would have to stop what you were doing and seek shelter or fire, probably both. Otherwise, you would have died of hypothermia. Now, hypothermia still exists in the game to some extent, but it's limited to a very small portion of the map. It's only on the way up to Erethea's Limbo. They also said that there is a golden dragon inside the mountain, probably teasing a world boss or maybe the Erethea's Limbo's location, but we now know that this is just the dragon Labresca, who got some vague lore, I believe, in the Guardian Awakening quest about the dragon eating a holy flame of Enix that was supposed to cleanse the world of corruption, but because it ate it, it got quartered to death, I think. And of course, Labresca is the Labresca's helmet, which now doesn't make sense. Why do we have a helmet named after a dragon? Like, did the dragon wear the helmet, or is the helmet made out of the dragon? I don't know. There's the main portion of the 2020 Calpheon Ball done, but there are still a few notes that Pearl Abyss talked about in the Q&A segment, which they used to do, but they don't do anymore during the balls for some reason. Obviously, it wasn't live as far as I know. It was prepared and pre-picked, but it was still cool to have some of the most popular, most frequently asked questions answered by the director of the game himself. So I am kind of sad to see this gone. And maybe you can call this another type of cancelled content. I will only do the Q&A segments rapid fire the same way they do, since they don't really talk about this in depth and it's usually a couple of sentences. Okay, so we start with the independent story system, where you could choose your own path through the story. For example, joining Jordine in the Calpheon storyline. I guess this would have been too much work for something people skip through anyway, but we did get a little bit of those choices in the story, although they don't affect that much as far as I know. Next, we have the Thornwood Castle PvEVP mode, and here I am once again not sure if it ever made it to the game, but I assume it got reworked into the War of the Roses. So correct me if I'm wrong here. After this, we have the new types of mounts other than horses, like bears and wolves and tigers and so on. I believe this has since been cancelled, or at least it has never been developed, because I remember Jay saying that having people ride on bears and wolves would break immersion. As if every female class destroying mobs in nothing but high heels and bikinis doesn't already do that. Come on, Jay. Come on. And finally, they said that they are completely willing to add a dwarf and papu class in the future, but that it will come one day. Well, it has been over 3.5 years since that announcement. We got 8 classes since then. 6 of them were female for some reason, and still no dwarf or papu class. I know they probably wouldn't sell costumes as well, since 90% of you BDO players are actual boomers, let's be real. But like, really, can we not get at least one of those 8 to be a Papu or a Dwarf? Imagine how cute a Papu class would be. Come on guys. It's like Shy, but without the pedophilia. Alright, that's one ball out of the way, the rest should be much faster though. Heidel Ball 2021 introduced only a couple of head scratchers, so let's go through them. We got the trading rework, where you could have joined one of either the Calpheon or Valencia trade guilds, and the trade system would basically have a World of Warcraft reputation system where you would advance in rank by doing things for the guild, and that would allow you to purchase and sell more valuable goods. They also planned on an upgrade system for wagons and camels, similar to the one we have for ships, so you would evolve your wagon or camel into better versions of the wagon or camel. I think the camel would become a caravan or something. And needless to say, we didn't get this when the trade rework happened last year, and what we did get has been since shut down and is supposed to be replaced sometime soon. Next, we have Elvia Calpheon, and you may be thinking that we did get Elvia Calpheon, and you are right, but we did not get the version PA said we would get. Elvia Calpheon was supposed to work with a weather and sort of Pokemon style monster weakness and strength. Basically, different types of weather would give you different buffs, and the monsters would get different debuffs. I have no idea how they wanted to make this to work. Sounds like an actual nightmare to develop and code. I mean, with this system, they said you would need 340 AP to go to Hex Sanctuary in 2021. We didn't even have Debo belts at that time. It really looks like they scrapped the weather system entirely and rebalanced the zones accordingly. The Ancient Spirit Light and the rifts that spawn the bosses, I assume, is a remnant of the old system, since each boss has their own special weather effects when they spawn, and I really don't know why Perlabis was so interested in adding honestly meaningless weather-based systems into the game, and why they ultimately didn't decide to do it. So I really don't know, maybe the engine is just not there, maybe it was really too painful to grind there or not fun, I don't know. And that's it for the main portion of the ball. We once again have dev notes, so here are some things from there. They mentioned that they would like to make zones that are customized to different combat styles, like mobs being weak to magic, or ranged characters having an easier time in certain zones. I guess Dekia is the closest one we get to this, since it helps classes with low mobility, but other than that, as far as I know, there are no such spots in the game right now. One thing that I am not sure about, since I don't have a character that would fit the criteria to prove this, is getting a statue of your character that you could have placed in your mansion after reaching level 65. I don't think this made it into the game, but my highest character level is 63, so if any of you are watching who have that high character level, be sure to check this for me. It definitely sounds like a better reward than a Tricapotia necklace though. And the last thing from this ball is alternate means of progression. They mentioned alchemy, RBF, and farming. I have no idea what this was supposed to mean. They were talking about Kafra Stone enhancing prior to this, so I assume that just meant putting Kafras into the pool of rewards you could get for these activities. Again, no clue, but there is no such thing as a different means of progression other than Kafras in the game right now, as far as I know, unless you really want to count Black Star, but I don't know. Let's move to the next ball, which has the one thing I never knew I wanted until I saw it in here during my research. This has been cancelled, officially cancelled by PA for some reason, despite basically fully developed, and my only question is why? I'm talking about snowboarding. Yes, BDO was supposed to have snowboarding in Mountain of Eternal Winter, but they cancelled it because according to them, it wasn't meaningful content. Really? Perlabis, you mean to tell me that looking for 120 boxes in Land of the Morning Light is somehow more meaningful content than snowboarding? Really? What a waste. Look how cool it is! I want to snowboard! Come on, PA, put it back! Put it back! This is also the ball where PA admitted that they were way too ambitious with previous promised content and that they apologized for empty promises, which I find kind of funny because they then go to talk about content that they would later cancel or just not deliver on. So that's just cosmic irony for you. So let's talk about that content. First we have Arena of Solar, which did make it to the game servers, but not as the full version that was promised. I already talked about the 10v10 mode, which got kinda remade into GVG, but it's not the only one that didn't make it. The other one is a 1v1 and 1v1 ranked matchmaking. Will we ever get it? Probably not. They also talked briefly about life skills and they promised ice fishing in Mountain of Eternal Winter. We did get ice fishing, kind of, but only as an event. And it's not even in the same region, it's near Velia in Balenos. So I don't know what's going on there. Same for the alpaca mount that you get for the event for your shy. This was originally supposed to be a tameable mount. And I don't think it is tameable, I think it's just an event reward, so I really don't know what's going on there. They also talked about making harpoon fishing more fun and accessible instead of just buffing the fish, but we already know what happened. They did not make it more fun or accessible, and they did just buff the value of the fish. One more life skill they talked about was hunting, and they kind of talked about wanting more variety for hunting zones, but funnily enough, since this ball, the only hunting zone added to the game was the Land of the Morning Light sniper spot, which I suppose does fit the criteria of being different than the other ones, assuming you don't count the sniper spot in Balenos, which let's not do that, but one spot is not exactly variety, right? That is it for Calpheon Ball 2021. But there is one more question in the Q&A section that I really need to shout out. Which one of you asked Jay if they are adding NFTs to BDO? Why? Interestingly enough, Calpheon Ball 2021 had a part 2, but it was relatively short, so the only promise that we did not get is once again the Elvia Calpheon weather system. Here, they even said that they planned it so that the monsters would physically change with the weather, so I really believe this was scaled back into just the 3 bosses. Also, it's really funny that they talk about weather changing the monsters, but then when they talk about mechanics, they mention the Elvia Troll Petrify mechanic, which has nothing to do with the weather. So why mention it? This is not entirely true. There is one more thing that was talked about in Calpheon Ball Part 2 that I missed the first time, and it's the idea of adding a horse without an owner system, where you would have wild horses all around the map that would spawn, kind of like we have now, but instead of taming them, you could actually mount them and ride them, and they would be like regular horses, except you couldn't put them into the stable, and after a certain amount of time, or maybe after you dismount it, they would disappear forever. So it would be more like a horse taxi than a horse taming system. Now, we did kind of get this with the Traveler's Horse that you can still ride right now, although there is not much of a reason to do it, but this was supposed to help new players, and they said that even Dream Horses would be obtainable through this way if you were lucky enough, for a short amount of time of course. But obviously we already got a free Dream Horse for everyone that joins the game, so I think there is no real reason to have this system anymore anyway. Moving on to Heidel Ball 2022, we have another content that most of you already know about and might be expecting to drop. It has been mentioned throughout all of the previous balls up to this point as well, but this is the last time they actually mention it by name. After this, they don't talk about it at all. Of course, it's the 4th Attraction dungeon. So, since this is the last time they talk about it, here is all the information I was able to get. The final boss should have been none other than Ilestra herself, and the biome where this dungeon would be taking place would be canyons, which to me kind of sounds like the dungeon would be placed in Ulukita, since that place is obviously very about canyons, and it is also the homeland of Ilesdra, so it makes the most sense to me. They also said that during the release of the second and third dungeon, they found the content to be too difficult, so they want to make the fourth one based on more puzzles and mechanics rather than just raw gear. That's all we got. Not just for the dungeon, but also for the ball as a whole when it comes to empty promises. Although there is one more thing that I find kind of funny, and it's that before this ball, they reworked Node Wars to focus them more on big guilds, and they didn't want guilds to just snipe nodes. But we live in the future, and we know what Node Wars look like today. So I think that is really funny. There isn't really anything to talk about in Calpheon Ball 2022. I think this is because Calpheon Ball 2021 had two parts, and the second part took place in March, and I guess they still wanted 6 months between that and Heidel Ball, so Heidel Ball was in like September, which meant that Calpheon Ball had like 3 months of development time to really develop anything. So during this ball they mostly just talked about Wusa and Meigu and the idea of the twin classes and Land of the Morning Light in general. And there isn't really anything that was talked about here that we didn't get. The only really interesting snippet here that was mentioned is that they said there would be 8 bosses in the boss blitz, but now we have 10, and even at the release we had 9. So I really wonder which one they added last. Okay, that leaves us with the year 2023. Let's start with the Heidel Ball, or I guess they called it FESTA 2023, I don't know why. Here we have to talk about Calamity 8 through 10 in the boss rush system. They talked about the way they want to make it work more in the following Calpheon Ball, but it was clearly thought of from the beginning, otherwise we wouldn't have the Calamity 8 through 10 in the UI. Maybe we will finally get it with the Land of the Morning Light Part 2. And jumping ahead a bit, they also wanted to introduce challenges and achievements for the boss blitz, but I'm pressing X on that one. We also have a couple of quality of life changes that got added into the game, but not as was fully promised. First, we have the item sword in the inventory that works for your character inventory, so regular Pearl and family inventory works, but according to Pearl Abyss, it was also supposed to work for storage and warehouse storage. Please make it happen already, PA. I really need this. My Heidel is so messy, you don't even know. You don't even want to know. The other quality of life that got added into the game is the life skill tool wheel, and this got added fairly recently, but not as was promised once again. The way it works now is almost the same, but it was promised that it would also include matchlocks and sniper rifles, and it doesn't do that yet. Maybe later, I assume that we might, because this has really happened like last month. Final one, Calpheon 2023. Once again, we start with something that got added into the game, but not in the full way that it was promised, and honestly, if they ever add this into the game in the way they want to, life skills might just die on the spot. There are 2 things that have not been added. I'm obviously talking about item simplification. The first one is seeds being stackable. I have heard somewhere that there have been some problems with implementing this feature, but hopefully we will get it one day, since this is really just quality of life and it's saving you inventory slots on your alts that you are using for your farms. So there is nothing problematic there. What is problematic, however, is the promise of consolidating or simplifying meat, blood, and although they have not really said this, probably other gatherable ingredients. Now, they already consolidated fruits and traces, which to me was one of the worst changes life skills have ever gotten, as the only person who actually benefits from a change like that is the person who buys the potions. Gathering is worse money, it's also worse EXP, and alchemy is relatively the same, but only if you literally do alchemy and nothing else. If you are like a normal person and you do alchemy every now and then, or you do it in like batches or whatnot, you will be making less money per hour than you were. The only time where it's different is when you buy the items from the central market and you make them into the potions, because then the profit is relatively the same as it was before. Now it's just less bottlenecky. It's just a stupid idea to increase supply without increasing demand, because then this is exactly what happens. And we have seen this with food, We are now seeing this with alchemy. So imagine what would happen if we did this with every blood and every meat and every ore and every lumber and every what have you in the game. Life scaling would be completely dead in terms of profitability. Gathering would die as the meat and blood and saps and whatever would be completely mint priced, which means that everything that has to do with that gathering would die as well. So cooking, which already has problems, would die. Alchemy, which already has problems, would die. Processing, which nobody really does, would die. And hunting, which is basically gathering but different way of acquisition, would also go down in profit. So everybody who does life skill would be completely screwed over, and the only people who would benefit would be the new players who now have an easier game to get into, and the people buying the potions and the food, etc., because now everything is much cheaper. We already see how this works. Cooking already suffers from this because a way back they introduced Agris fever to gathering, which removed the meat and blood bottlenecks entirely, and they killed all profitability of cooking. Yes, I know that you can already replace one type of meat with another, like red meat is basically all of the main continent, but those meats still have different prices because certain gathering spots are harder to do than others, and that requires the person who buys the ingredient to either be patient or to just buy the more expensive one. Merging the meat completely would mean that those already less ventured into spots would be completely abandoned, and everyone would be in the same couple of spots. Already, life skills suffer from the lack of variety. What Pearl Abyss needs to do, instead of just increasing supply, which is all they tend to do from what I have been able to see, because this has been a constant theme throughout all of the balls. People have been constantly asking about life skill profitability because life skill profitability has been static for who knows how long. Every single time Pearl Abyss just increases supply, but this does nothing because if you increase supply without increasing the demand, the price will go down. So, okay, you now make more meat, but the meat sells for less, so you actually made the same amount of silver. It actually baffles me that they have not been able to figure out a way to increase demand. So what they need to do is not consolidate, they need to actually add more variety. Hopefully in Land of the Morning Light Part 2 and further on we will have more recipes, more ingredients, more places to gather, etc. I really hope that that will be the case. I really hope that this idea of merging meat and blood and other gatherable ingredients will never see the light of day, because I would probably quit the game on the spot and never look back. Let's just move on from this topic altogether, because I'm just starting to get heated once again. We got more promises that have not yet been implemented into the game, and sellable characters is one of them, and there is not really much else to talk about here. This one looks like it might still get introduced down the line though. Next we have something that I did briefly mention in my Heidel Ball 2024 rundown, and it's the trading rework. Would you believe me if I told you it has been 8 months since they removed trading, and that they haven't said a single word about the system that is supposed to replace it? At least now, thanks to the research I did during this video, I know that this is not the first time, and it probably won't be the last time either. I just hope it's not just a lazy bartering reskin. Makes no sense to have 2 different life skills acting entirely the same or similarly enough to the point where there is no reason to distinguish between them. I believe I talked about this idea in my problems with life skills video, where my idea for the new trading system was to connect the worker crates to the active life skills a bit more. Like having crates that need a certain trading item to be made for money, and combining the two through trading your gathered ingredients for those trade goods. I think this would be a decent way to do it, since the way it is now, the crates and the trade system in general feel kind of disconnected from each other. Coming up, we have some guild-based promises that we are still waiting for. We have the increased maximum daily wage up to 100 mil per day. That one is self-explanatory. We have guild titles, which I think got kind of revamped into the recently announced guild trait and tier system from Heidel Ball 2024. We have new special guild missions, which I assume they just mean the event guild missions. but we could really use some life skill guild missions, please. And speaking of guild missions, we have individual guild missions for each guild member and being able to accept the guild missions whenever and wherever. We also have a special CTG just for the Khan guild boss, which I believe we don't have just yet. I don't do Khan anymore, but I remember that when I still did, which was like a couple months ago, we had to use the regular CTG to get there and then taxi back to Velia. And then the big promise that we still don't have, and it's guild mansions, or rather using a member's mansion as your guild house. What is taking them so long to implement this? I don't know. It's such a cool social feature and I don't think it can be that hard to implement, since you can already visit houses of other people, not just other guild members. So what makes this one so hard to do? I don't know. We have a small one, which is a new quest UI. This one I think is needed because the current UI is a mess and it's not very readable, and we could really use a fresh take that is easily approachable for newer players. And before we go, let's finish this video with a big one. It's the Altar of Blood. Where is it? Will it ever arrive? This is another one of those contents that didn't even get a mention in the recent Heidel Ball, much like the Calamity 8 through 10 in the Land of the Morning Light boss blitz or the trading rework. When it comes to the altar though, I am very skeptical that we will ever see this, since judging from what they said about it and comparing it to what they said about Land of the Morning Light Part 2 boss blitz in the newest ball, it really feels like the two concepts are basically one and the same. It's both supposed to be cooperative, it has two different modes, the boss blitz will have 2 instead of the ultras 3, but otherwise they feel really just the same. And the only difference is that Altar of Blood was somehow supposed to be a quote-unquote defense type challenge, whatever that means. That's all the balls, but I have one more thing that I want to talk about, although this has not been announced or talked about on any other ball. I really feel like this should be mentioned here though, because we are talking about promises, and this one is one of the most recent empty promises that we have gotten, and it's even funnier because they asked us for feedback and they never followed up on it. Most of you probably remember this one. I don't know what to call it because it doesn't have a name, but there was a poll on G-Labs on the 29th of December 2023, you can go and look it up, where Perlabis asked us players which option they would want out of the 3 that we got, and I will get to them, to improve PvP in both large scale and 1v1. The options were 1. Increase survivability, but add more options to break the fence and also give classes more CC. 2. Replace some super armors with frontal guards. And 3. Give every single class a grab. I know, this was really popular back in the day. I assume we kinda got the changes with the number of hits and updates to evasion and accuracy. I guess you could kind of call it that, but then that's not either one of these 3 options. That's completely different, even though this kind of sounds like the closest to the first one, but not really. Maybe one day we will actually get one of these. Maybe the handwritten letters that the people sent to PA never made it or something. Or maybe it's just another empty promise. With that being said, this is all I have for you today, handsome. It was a somewhat longer video today, so I hope you stayed with me till the end and I hope you liked it. Again, although it may have been more negative than my usual videos, it is not meant as a hit piece, and I do not condone anyone who uses this as proof that Perlabis is a bunch of liars, or that they say things for clout, or that they are just generally incompetent and don't know what they are doing. I really do believe that these things were either just over-ambitious from PA, or that they simply deemed these contents to not be fun internally and that's why they cancelled them. I really hope I didn't bite off more than I could chew with this one, so once again sorry for any potential mistakes in the video. I just thought this would be a fun topic and I haven't really seen anyone else discuss anything like this on YouTube yet. Next video I am not quite sure yet what the topic is going to be, as I have a couple of ideas, but none are fully developed just yet, but still do stay tuned for that, whatever it's going to be. And I also want to focus more on streaming in general on Twitch TV now that this video is done, as it did take quite a bit of research and scripting. Alright, I won't bore you any longer with pretentious speech. Remember to like and subscribe. Do tell me if you know something I don't, and enjoy your grind.